Day 47. No arrest. No named suspect. No Nancy. 41 minutes that, according to investigators, contained the beginning of whatever happened to an 84-year-old woman who had lived in this city for more than 50 years. What do you think explains how someone got inside? The conversation in this community has raised details that the investigators themselves have not addressed publicly. 10 days after Nancy disappeared, FBI Director Kash Patel stood before cameras and made an announcement. The agency had recovered footage from Nancy's Nest camera. This was not footage that had been waiting on a hard drive. Nancy did not have a cloud subscription. The camera stored locally. But the FBI, working alongside engineers from Google for 11 days, had reached into the back-end server infrastructure and pulled the images back. What they recovered showed the figure from 1:32 a.m., in detail sufficient to begin building a profile. A balaclava covering the face. The Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack, a model sold exclusively through Walmart. Gloves, a weapon. And, according to former FBI profiler Jim Clemente, who analyzed the footage independently, what appears to be a tattoo on the suspect's right wrist. What did FBI find when they finally looked inside those 41 minutes? The backpack became one of the most significant physical leads in the investigation. Sheriff Chris Nanos called it exactly that, one of the most promising physical leads the case has produced. The FBI moved quickly to coordinate with Walmart, working to trace purchase records for that specific model. As of this recording, that trace is ongoing. Inside Nancy's home, investigators recovered a DNA profile. Male, unknown. Mixed, meaning the sample contains genetic material from at least 2 individuals. The profile was run against CODIS, the national DNA database. No match. That result did not close the door. It opened a different one. C.C. Moore is a forensic genetic genealogist who works with Parabon NanoLabs. She has solved more than 300 cases. She is involved in this investigation. The answer is not what anyone expected, and it changes the shape of this entire case. Stay with this. Her public statement on this case is 4 words. He will be identified. The methodology she uses does not require a CODIS match. It works from public genealogy databases, building family trees outward from a DNA profile until a living relative leads investigators to a name. It has identified killers who committed crimes decades ago. It has put names to Jane Does, who had been buried without one for 30 years. It is working on the DNA from Nancy Guthrie's home right now. On February 4, and again on February 7, FBI agents searched the home of Annie Guthrie and her husband Tomaso Chioni. The second search, conducted after sunset on February 7, was documented by reporters on the scene. Agents carried a Celebrite UFED, a forensic extraction device capable of recovering deleted calls, messages, location history, and photographs from digital devices. They left carrying brown evidence bags. One agent's badge, photographed by TMZ, identified them as affiliated with ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Unit. Because the evidence that investigators recovered from a device that had been manually switched off, that detail was not explained publicly. A Ring camera, approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, captured a vehicle moving southbound at 2:36 a.m. on February 1. NBC correspondent Liz Kreutz drove the route from Nancy's home to that camera location. It takes 6 minutes by car. The vehicle in that footage has been under analysis at the FBI laboratory in Quantico for more than 6 weeks. As of this recording, its make and model have not been identified. The blue Honda CR-V belonging to Annie and Tomaso was seized and disassembled for forensic examination. GPS data, door sensor logs, and speed records were extracted. It has been held for more than 40 days. In that same period, a separate Tucson residence was raided by a SWAT-style operation on February 13. The occupant detained, then released without charges, and his vehicle returned within approximately 2 weeks. Recovered only after 11 days of work by FBI agents alongside engineers from one of the largest technology companies in the world, Tomaso's car is still at a PCSD facility, currently being reassembled. No return timeline has been given. On the 17th of March 2026, multiple sources confirmed that all members of the Guthrie family, including Annie and Tomaso, had passed polygraph examinations. The evidence is accumulating. The DNA is being processed. The backpack is being traced. The vehicle footage is being analyzed. And yet, on day 47, the contradiction at the center of this case remains exactly where it has been since the beginning. On the 16th of February 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos stood before cameras and made two statements. The Guthrie family, including all siblings and their spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects, and the blue Honda CR-V belonging to Annie and Tomaso had been processed. Past tense, done. 10 days later, a CBS 5 reporter named Brianna Whitney asked the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly about the vehicle. The response she received contradicted the February 16 statement entirely. Tells a story that no one who planned this crime wanted told. The car was still part of the active investigation. No explanation was offered for the discrepancy. No correction was issued. The two statements simply exist side by side in the public record, and no one in an official capacity has explained how both can be true. This was not the first time Sheriff Nanos had said two things that could not simultaneously be correct. On February 2, 4 days after Nancy disappeared, Nanos told the public there was no danger to the community. On March 12, the same man told NBC that the suspect could absolutely strike again. 40 days, the same sheriff. Two assessments that point in opposite directions. On the question of who drove Nancy home on the night of January 31, the record shows 4 separate answers from the same office. Annie drove her. Tomaso drove her. Annie and Tomaso drove her together. The family brought her home. The answer that eventually became official: Tomaso, alone. These are not minor inconsistencies. That evidence is coming. First, you need to know who Nancy Guthrie was. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. When a case turns on what happened in a specific window of time, involving specific people, the integrity of public statements from the investigating agency is not a secondary concern. It is load-bearing. And then there is the DNA. Federal sources, speaking to reporters, described the sheriff's decision to send Nancy's DNA evidence to a private laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, rather than to the FBI's National Crime Lab at Quantico, as dumb. One source used the word insane. The FBI had requested the Quantico routing. Sheriff Nanos declined. The contract with DNA Labs International, the Florida facility, was valued at approximately $200,000. The DNA from inside Nancy's home, a mixed male profile from at least 2 individuals, is currently being processed at that facility. Meanwhile, a rental property located a few blocks from Nancy's house, occupied during the period surrounding the abduction, was vacated within 48 hours of her disappearance. A forensic team processed the location. The results have not been made public. She lived alone in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, on a street called Camino Real. And the vehicle that was supposedly processed and returned? As of March 10, it was documented at a PCSD facility, in the process of being reassembled after having been taken apart for forensic examination. As of March 11, the Sheriff's Department confirmed to Parade magazine that it had not been returned to the family and that there was no specific timeline for when it would be. Former PCSD SWAT Commander Bob Kriegier has offered an explanation for why a vehicle might be held this long: to create a case as rock solid as possible, built for a jury. That framing implies a direction. It implies a destination. It does not explain the statements that preceded it. What it leaves is a question that the evidence itself has not answered. She had been in this city for more than 50 years. If the family was cleared on February 16, and if all members of that family passed polygraph examinations, as confirmed by multiple sources on March 17, then why does the car remain? The investigation is continuing. The case is building. But toward what and toward whom has not been said publicly. That is where the valley ends. Let's be precise about what former CIA and FBI analyst Tracy Walder said, because it reframes everything. Nancy Guthrie was not the target. Savannah Guthrie was. According to Walder's analysis, Nancy was the access point. An 84-year-old woman living alone, with a pacemaker and a pink cane, in a gated community in Tucson. She was the easiest point of contact in a family that includes one of the most recognized faces in American broadcast media. Walder's conclusion: this crime was designed around Savannah, and Nancy was the mechanism by which the perpetrators believed they could reach her. Tucson was not a place she had ended up. That analysis did not exist in isolation. Former FBI Deputy Assistant Director John Miller offered a parallel assessment. The crime, he said, went wrong immediately, and the ransom notes, he suggested, may not be what they appear. Miller's hypothesis, The notes sent to TMZ, to local Tucson news stations, to KGUN and KLDO, notes that contain details about Nancy's Apple Watch and her broken rear floodlights, details that had not been publicly released at the time they arrived, may represent an attempt to re-engineer the narrative, to reconstruct what happened as a kidnapping after Nancy was already dead, not proof of life, not a negotiation, a cover story written after the fact, by someone who needed the world to believe she was still out there. No proof of life was ever included in any of the notes. Deadlines passed. No contact followed. Derek Kalla was arrested for one fraudulent note. The others remain in federal evidence, their authenticity disputed, their origins unknown. That is where this story stands right now, as of the 20th of March 2026, not at the beginning. It was the place she had chosen, and stayed, and built a life so deep that leaving it was never a question she entertained. Former FBI behavioral analysts James Fitzgerald and Raymond Carr, analyzing the case through their podcast Code Red, constructed a behavioral profile of whoever planned this crime. The language they used was fantasy-driven behavior. Someone who had spent time imagining this, researching it, building toward it across months. Someone who looked up a salary figure and arrived at a ransom number that corresponded to it. Someone who walked the approach to an old woman's home 3 weeks before they came back with a backpack and a weapon. Sheriff Nanos, on March 12, said something that the entire investigative community has been examining since. We believe we know why he was here, and we have known since day one. He, singular, a person, a motive understood from the beginning. Former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole had raised a concern weeks earlier when the sheriff's department announced publicly that there were no suspects. In her experience, she said, that kind of announcement is unusual. Making it early and loudly can cause a perpetrator to relax, to believe the pressure is off. She walked with a pink cane. She wore a hearing aid during the day. Whether that is what happened here is not known. What is known is that Morgan Wright, a former detective and intelligence analyst who was physically present in Tucson during the investigation, reached his own conclusion. A targeted abduction that went wrong. A crime that ended, in his assessment, not with Nancy in a room somewhere waiting for a ransom to be paid. He believes she is gone. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, speaking on March 10, said it this way: the search phase is over, not the investigation, the search. Those are different things, and both of them know it. Now consider what that means in the context of everything that came before. The two-person entry. The blood pattern that shows someone being carried, not walking. The pacemaker that disconnected at 2:28 inches the morning. The ransom notes with details only an insider could know, sent to news organizations with no follow-up. No channel, no proof that the person they claimed to be holding was alive. She had a pacemaker, took heart medication daily, and could not travel more than 50 yards without support. If the crime went wrong immediately, and if the notes were written after the fact, to redirect the narrative toward a kidnapping that may never have been the plan, then the question is not where Nancy is being held. The question is, who built this, why they built it around Savannah, and what evidence is close enough right now to put a name to that. Someone needs to hear this. If you know anyone following this case, send this to them. Because the detail about Savannah as the actual target, and what it implies about the level of planning involved, is not being covered the way it should be. 47 days in, this is where the investigation actually stands. The DNA is the center of gravity. A mixed male profile from at least 2 individuals, recovered from inside Nancy's home, currently being processed using forensic genetic genealogy. C.C. Moore of Parabon NanoLabs, who has resolved more than 300 cases using this method, has said 4 words about this one: he will be identified. These are not details meant to make her seem fragile. That is not optimism. That is a description of a methodology with a documented track record. The Ozark Trail backpack is still being traced. Sheriff Nanos called it one of the most promising physical leads in the case. The FBI is working with Walmart to identify when and where the specific unit captured on camera was purchased. That trail narrows with every record that is reviewed. The utility box near Nancy's home, found damaged, has been confirmed by investigators as part of the active case. The vehicle seen on the Ring camera at 2:36 a.m., 6 minutes by car from Nancy's house, is still under analysis at Quantico. 6 weeks in, no make or model has been confirmed. And today, the 20th of March 2026, is day 47. That number is not arbitrary. 47 days after the murders of 4 University of Idaho students in November 2022, Brian Koberger was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. They are details that matter, as you will see, because someone knew them. Every Sunday, Nancy watched church services online. The DNA had found him, the behavioral profile had narrowed the field, and on day 47, it was over. This is not Idaho. Every case is its own architecture of evidence, its own set of mistakes made and traces left. But the parallel is not lost on the people watching this one. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore put it plainly: the only people who know what happened are the people who committed it. Former FBI Special Agent in charge, Steve Hooper, described it as a matter of finding that one person, that one credible source who breaks the seal. The case is not cold. The labs are running. The genealogy is being built outward from a DNA sample, one family branch at a time, toward a name that does not yet appear in any public document. It will. This case has forced into public view a set of investigative tools that most people have never encountered. She was a woman of deep faith, and when the pandemic made in-person attendance difficult, she adapted. And understanding them changes how you read everything that has happened over the last 47 days. Start with forensic genetic genealogy. When investigators say the DNA recovered from Nancy's home did not match any profile in CODIS, the National Criminal Database, that used to be the end of the road, an unidentified sample, a dead lead. But CODIS is not the only database in existence. Public genealogy platforms, the kind used by people researching their family histories, contain the voluntary DNA submissions of millions of individuals. Forensic genetic genealogists like C.C. Moore use those submissions to build outward. If a distant cousin of the person who left DNA at Nancy's home uploaded their own profile to a public platform, that connection exists, and it can be traced. The genealogist constructs a family tree from that partial match, works forward through generations, and narrows candidates until investigators have a name to verify against physical evidence. It does not require a prior arrest. It does not require the suspect to have ever interacted with law enforcement. The live stream became her ritual. If she missed it, the people who knew her would notice. It requires only that someone in their biological family tree chose to participate in consumer genetics. This is how cases with no CODIS match get solved. This is why C.C. Moore said he will be identified. Then there is blood stain pattern analysis, and what the evidence at Nancy's front door actually communicates. The drops fell straight down, no voids. In physical terms, a void in a blood stain pattern occurs when an object or body part interrupts the fall of blood. The absence of voids at the scene means nothing interrupted the fall, which means Nancy was not on the ground, not moving under her own weight, not positioned in a way that would block the drops. The forensic interpretation: she was being carried, upright or close to it, by someone whose body was not between the blood source and the ground. That is not a detail. That is a description of what happened at that doorway. And then that is what this case teaches about the behavioral footprint of premeditated violence. She had 3 children. Savannah Guthrie, the host of NBC's Today Show, was her second daughter. What this case reveals about how crimes like this announce themselves before they happen is something researchers in criminal psychology have documented repeatedly. Fantasy-driven offenders do not simply act. They rehearse. The January 11 visit without a backpack, the January 24 activity in the neighborhood, the alleged search history stretching back months, these are not evidence of impulsiveness. They are evidence of someone who had been living inside this plan long before they carried it out, adjusting it, refining it, and in doing so, leaving marks. The lesson for investigators, and for anyone thinking about public safety: premeditation leaves traces, and those traces accumulate in the weeks before the act, not during it. Annie Guthrie stood in front of her mother's house on March 1, 22 days after she had last spoken publicly, and she left behind a card. She had written, "Though we are surrounded by so much darkness, our love burns bright. We love you, Mommy." That is not a statement for a press conference. That is not language shaped for cameras. Annie Guthrie, a poet, an author, and a jeweler, was her eldest. That is a daughter writing to a woman she does not know how to reach anymore, leaving words on a doorstep because there is nothing else left to leave. Day 47. No arrest. No named suspect. $1 million in reward money, offered by Savannah Guthrie, still unclaimed. The DNA is being processed. The backpack is being traced. The genealogy is being built. Somewhere in Tucson, or somewhere connected to it, a person who wore a balaclava and carried an Ozark Trail backpack on the night of February 1 is still unidentified in any official document. That will not remain true forever. The science does not allow for it. If this case matters to you, if you think someone in your circle needs to understand what is actually happening here and what the evidence actually shows, share this. And if you want to follow what comes next, because something will come next, subscribe. Cameron Guthrie, a military pilot, was her son. When the DNA resolves, when the purchase records on that backpack produce a name, when day 47 becomes the day before everything changes, this channel will cover it the same way we covered this, with the evidence, with the experts, and with the facts as they actually stand. Nancy Guthrie has been gone for 47 days. Her family is still waiting. The investigation is still running, and the story is not finished. Not at the moment a family sat down to dinner and played cards and said goodnight. They were not an abstract family. They were present. They were involved. And on the evening of January 31, Nancy spent time with two of them. She arrived at Annie's house by Uber at approximately 5:32 that afternoon. Annie's husband, Tomaso Chioni, was there. The three of them had dinner. They played cards. By any account available, it was an ordinary evening, the kind of evening that does not become a timeline entry until something goes wrong. At some point after 9:30, Tomaso drove Nancy home. He drove a blue Honda CR-V. The route was not long. He pulled into the driveway, waited for the garage door to open at 9:48, watched it close at 9:50, and then he drove away. That pink cane Nancy used every day to walk was still inside the house the next morning. So were her phone, her wallet, her medication, and her purse. Day 47. And the only thing law enforcement will confirm is that they are still working. She had not packed. She had not planned. Whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie that night, it did not begin with her choosing to leave. Here is what investigators now know, and what they did not know in the hours immediately after Nancy disappeared. 21 days before January 31, on January 11, a figure appeared at Nancy's home. This was confirmed by CNN sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, and later corroborated through the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The figure approached along the same path that would be used on the night of the abduction. But on January 11, there was no backpack. According to investigators, this was a reconnaissance visit, a dry run, someone walking the approach to understand what they would find when they returned. On January 24, 1 week before Nancy disappeared, FBI agents later asked neighbors about a second incident in the area. One witness described a man walking between properties carrying a clipboard. So, let's go back. The 31st of January 2026, Tucson, Arizona. No official confirmation has been made about what occurred that day, but the FBI's interest in it is confirmed. Someone had been watching this house, not once, at least twice, in the 3 weeks before January 31, and possibly longer, according to alleged data reported by Fox News Digital. Search activity linked, allegedly, to Nancy's home address appeared in Google Trends data as far back as June 2025. Search activity linked, allegedly, to Savannah Guthrie's salary, the figure later cited in ransom demands, appeared in December 2025. Google has noted that the tool can display what it describes as random noise, and these data points remain alleged, not confirmed. But they exist in the record, and investigators are aware of them. What is confirmed is this. At 1:32 inches the morning on February 1, a figure appeared at the front door of Nancy's home, captured on her Nest camera. The figure wore a balaclava. They carried an Ozark Trail 2.5-liter backpack, the kind sold exclusively at Walmart. They wore gloves. They carried a weapon. At 1:47 a.m., the Nest camera was manually switched off. 9:48 inches the evening, a garage door opens at a house in the Catalina foothills. At 2:12 a.m., the system logged a motion detection event at the front door. No footage. Someone was still there. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from Bluetooth. Not a low battery notification. Not a scheduled sync failure. A disconnection. At 2:28 inches the morning, the device that had been keeping time with Nancy Guthrie's heart went silent. That silence is the end of what the timeline can tell us for certain. What investigators found in the hours and days that followed is where this story becomes something else entirely. On the morning of February 1, When family members arrived to check on Nancy after she failed to appear for her Sunday church live stream, they found blood on the front steps. This was not a smear. This was not a trace. The blood was tested. It was Nancy's. And the pattern it made on that stone tells investigators something precise. 2 minutes later, at 9:50, it closes. The man who had driven Nancy Guthrie home waited until she was inside. Maureen O'Connell is a former FBI agent who has spent years analyzing physical evidence. Her assessment of the bloodstain pattern at Nancy's front door is this: the drops fell straight down, with no gaps, no voids in the pattern. In forensic terms, that absence of voids tells a story. It means Nancy was not walking when that blood fell. She was being carried. She was carried out of her own home. The lock on the back door of Nancy's house was changed by investigators. That is confirmed. Former FBI special agent and SWAT veteran Jennifer Coffindaffer has noted that investigators change locks specifically at the point of entry. The back door was the entry point, but the front gate, the security gate at the front of the property, was intact. Nancy's neighbor Laura Gargano told reporters that the front gate could not be forced. It is not a gate that breaks. It is a gate that opens, and it opens from the inside. Then he left. 41 minutes, that is the number, not an hour, not a full night, which means, according to Coffindaffer's analysis, this was not one person working alone. The back entry and the front exit require two separate positions. One person enters from the rear. A second is already at the front, or positioned to receive. Coffindaffer has described this as a division of labor. 2 people, at minimum. And then there are the ransom notes. In the days following Nancy's disappearance, notes were sent to multiple media outlets: TMZ, KOL News, 13, Tucson, KGUN, and KLDO. FBI Special Agent in Charge Hyth Janae confirmed publicly that some of those notes contained details that had not been released to the public at the time they were sent. The location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside the house. The broken floodlights at the rear of the property. 41 minutes between the moment that garage door closed and the moment that would define everything that came after. 41 minutes that nobody saw. Details that someone would only know if they had been inside. One man, Derek Kalla of California, was arrested for sending a fraudulent ransom note, an attempt to exploit the situation for financial gain. His phone is now in federal evidence, but he did not write all of them. The notes that contain non-public information came from somewhere else. If there were 2 people, and someone inside those walls knew where the Apple Watch was and which lights were broken, then the question this evidence raises is not simply who. It is how many, and what did they already know before they arrived? That question does not yet have an official answer, but the investigation that followed this discovery moved in a direction that no one who watched this case from the outside had fully anticipated. Comment below. Based on what you have just heard about the front gate and the evidence of 2 separate entry points,